Hey, everybody, it's Chris Mahan. Welcome back to another Lead Your Teen podcast, special podcast on Shadows on the Wall, the psychology of a school shooter. My name is Chris Mahan. I'm your host. A few weeks ago, we did this. There was some difficulties with a couple things. Hopefully, got all that worked out. And then last week, I was in Atlanta for a wonderful time up there at the Empower Success Fest as a speaker. So we did not do one last week. And then the other day, we had a horrible hurricane come through here and wipe out so much of our state here on the West Coast, right up through Georgia, right up through Tennessee into North Carolina. Absolutely devastating storm. So I just want to give a little PSA here. If you are able to help people in your area that have been hit by this storm in any way, whether it's food, volunteering, whether it's just helping with some emotional support, I would highly suggest that you try and do that. Um, 20 plus odd years ago, I was wiped out by Hurricane Floyd in North Carolina. There's nothing, well, there's a lot of things. It is incredibly devastating to be flooded and lose everything you have and your home, your valuables, your possessions, things that mean a lot to you. It's just an incredibly horrible, horrible thing. So if you can help, I suggest that you go to your local community food banks, go to the Salvation Army, go to the Red Cross, go to your county, ask what you can do. If you can start a food drive, if you can help raise money, if you can just be emotional support for people, because right now they really need it. So, with that said, I'm going to jump right into this week's topic on Shadows on the Wall, the psychology of a school shooter. And there's a lot of things that we have to think about when we're talking about this. And it's what are the warning signs? What are some things that we can look at as parents, as teachers, just as general citizens? What are kids doing? Where are they? What types of behaviors are they showing that we need to be aware of? And I think that this is something that in today's world, we don't want to really get into other people's lives. We don't want to, be that. Oh, there goes my phone. I think somebody's chiming in here. Hold on a second. Oh, it's my son. I'll be on. Thank you, Liam, to be on. Okay, cool. It's my son. He's at Camp Lejeune right now. So the warning signs, what do we look for when there's these problems with kids? What do we want to see? And in our society today, we're so afraid to speak up. They always say for kids in school with the bullying situation, see something, do something, or see something, say something. And I think that as parents, we don't do that. We see a kid that's maybe having some trouble, even if it's in your own family. Let's say you're an aunt or an uncle, and you've got a nephew who's a little bit off, and he's always a little strange, and you tell your brother or your sister, say, "Hey, I think little Johnny there has got some issues." That typically leads to family problems. That can typically lead to a argument between siblings about their kids. Uh, Parents don't want to believe it. They don't want to look at it. They don't want to think their kid's the next bad school shooter. But I also feel like it's important that we do say something and we get up there and we say, listen, you know, I've known your kid a long time, his whole life, and he's taken a turn. I know you guys have had some situations in your family. Again, this is going to be a very sensitive subject. These are hard discussions because people don't want to start rifts in their family. They don't want to start problems, especially with the holidays coming up. And I know this for a fact because even in my own family, if there's something that was going to be said or hurt someone's feelings or whatnot, you kind of tiptoe around it until it's too late. And I think in today's world, with the prevalence of the kids that are calling in. I noticed a couple weeks ago here in Florida, there was like I want to say like 4 or 5 call-ins. In fact, one of the sheriffs in South Florida actually did a perp walk with an 11-year-old. Now, do I agree with that for an 11-year-old? No, but I can understand the sheriff's frustration. I can totally understand um, the sheriff's frustration. Let me see if I can get to the chats here. Send a message. Let's see, chat. Let's make sure this is working this time. I'm gonna say hello to everybody because last time it didn't work. I'm making sure it works. It's working. Okay, awesome. So if you have any questions during this next hour, I would love for you to, jump on board here and let me know. Um, I know I'm getting text messages of people that want to jump in. I know it's 5 o'clock on a Sunday and there's football games going on. This will be recorded regardless if you chime in or not. I'm going to play it back. You can have it because I'm going to give you guys information. And next week, I have a very special guest. She's from Atlanta, Nora Giddens. She is a family and teen therapist. We're going to be talking with her. I'm also bringing in Annie Alvarez, who does an amazing parenting podcast. I've been out twice. She's out of Canada. She is a current school counselor up in Canada. So we're going to be talking with her. So as these weeks go on, we can really get into what we're doing here. Because the first couple weeks were a little bit iffy. Last week I missed, and the first week I had technical problems. This week, hurricane. So a lot of people are dealing with that down here, especially all the way up through the East Coast. But this will be recorded, so you can go back and watch it at your own pace, and I appreciate that. So let's jump right in. So some of the things that I pulled up, let me get to my other computer here. These are actual warning signs. I'm not a therapist, so I'm not going to sit here and tell you what to do. I'm going to get the information. I'm going to share it with you, and then you can also look up these things for yourself. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, you can always reach back out to me at leadyourteen@gmail.com. And I'll be happy to give you the sources where I get all this information and the other people that I'm talking with for this series so that you too can be informed and do your own investigation on things, do your own information gathering. So whatever works best for you and your family, then that can work best for you. So let me go get this open real quick. And I'm going to give you guys some warning signs. These are things that I think a lot of us probably say, well, that's pretty obvious stuff. But for some reason, I just typed in the wrong. Let's see here. Here we go. So for some reason, though, we are always afraid to acknowledge certain things. I'm looking at my other screen here. So one of the things, and I talk about this in my book, this is my new book here. One of the things that really bothers me with parents today is they are afraid to have those hard conversations, to literally sit down and say, you know, are you having some issues right now? Like what's happening with you? This is what happened in Georgia. A year ago, May 2023, the law actually showed up at that guy's house to say, hey, your son apparently allegedly put this message on Discord. And of course, the kid denied it. The dad said it wouldn't have ever happened. They let it go. Well, now I think he did do it. But as I said a few weeks ago, if that was my house, the minute that law enforcement, those two guys left, and I shut that door, I would be going through everything in my kid's backpack, phone, computer. Show me your apps. Show me what you said. Everything. I'd be looking at all their history to see. And if that was the case, okay, we dodged some issues here when the cops are gone, but now we're going to deal with it as a family. And I don't know what happened up there. I don't know these people. I'm not going to fortune tell and say what they did or didn't do. But for me, there would have been some serious conversation going on. And that is the number one thing right now is open lines of communication. If you feel like there's something happening, the one thing you never want to do is say you were doing this, you were doing that, you were making all these issues. Because the minute you put I've talked about this 1,000 times, the minute you put anybody, but especially a teenager, you back them into a corner with you statements in a conflict situation where they're already intensified with the adrenaline, it's already a hyper, sensitive situation. Thank you. Who is on? Give me some names. I got some people in here. Go in your chat box. Oh, Liam's there. Liam's there. Hello, Liam. How are you? Awesome. Liam is 22. He's my son. And he and his brother were homeschooled. And I took them out of school. Their mother and I took them out of school when they were very young because of some things that were happening in schools. This was a long time ago. Today, it's even worse. So I would appreciate anything that Liam and his Marine buddies, they're all the same age, might have to say about their high school experience or things that happened with them. I'd love to see their comments down there. Open lines of communication, very, very important. But how you approach that open line of communication, when you use a you statement, you do this and you do that, you never, and you're always. The solution then, and I've said this a million times, is put on that young person to fix it. And if you already have a distraught 15, 13, 15, 16, 17-year old, 10-year-old, they don't know how to deal with these things. They don't know how to articulate how they feel. And as leaders, as their parents, we have to be the ones to start that conversation, guide that conversation, not control the conversation, yelling, screaming, controlling, butting in, not listening. That is not talking. That's just lecturing. And Liam will probably tell you I did a lot of that when he was a kid because I didn't believe in smacking or anything like that. I didn't do anything, but I did lecture because I was just so angry all the time. But I had to learn that lecturing is not the way. You have to ask them, what's going on? What can I do? Is there something we can do together? Is there something that you need from me? And when you use that team approach, when it comes to a conflict situation or a situation where your son or daughter is not really sure how to handle something, use that team approach, it eliminates their stress. It eliminates that anxiety. It eliminates that guilt they may have or the fear of judgment they may have. And this is how we then start a conversation to figure out what's really going on in their life. So then we can, pinpoint the problem and begin to fix it and change it. Okay. So it says here approach with empathy. Start by talking to your team without judgment. I just said that. Show concern, understanding, not accusations. Let them know you're there to listen and support them. Now, I've never read this yet. I just pulled it up a second ago. It's been sitting on this laptop. But that's what I talk about in my book and in my leader style parent. The S is support. We have to support our young people and not just in financial means. That's what parents think that, well, I give them clothes and I give them food. That's not support for kids today. They need to feel that you are actually understanding them. That's where the empathy comes in. And I'm going to talk about some reasons why this isn't happening for a lot of kids in today's highly dysfunctional, highly depressed, highly anxiety ridden young people. There's some things we talk about. Number two, ask open ended questions. Instead of making assumptions, ask questions about how they're feeling, what's going on at school, how are they managing their emotions. Man, that's huge. Young people today, and even 20-year-olds, 25, 30-year-olds and up, they don't know how to manage their emotions. And one of the things that we talked about last week at the Empower Success Fest, because it was a big emotion driven event, is emotional regulation and emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is really, really big today because we're understanding that if we can't understand people by their body language and how they're looking and what they're doing, and then also our own sense of emotions. How do we control our own emotions? Do we get angry quickly? Do we make assumptions? Do we bury our emotions? All of these things, our kids are learning from us. They're watching us, they're listening to us, they're mirroring our behavior. So if we as parents are doing these things, of course they're going to do it too. Okay. So understanding emotions and understanding emotions, people often say, well, if I'm too emotional, then I'm weak or I'm this or I'm that. And the truth is we are emotional creatures. As human beings, we are emotional creatures. Our emotions are kind of our guidepost of how we feel. I mentioned early at the top of the show that we just had a horrific hurricane go through here all the way up through North Carolina, devastating just tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people more, just billions and billions of dollars in damage. Just incredible. I've seen pictures of North Carolina, lived there forever, and boy, it's just incredibly sad. Our emotions right now are telling us my life is over, everything's done. What am I going to do? How am I going to deal with this? How am I going to regroup from this? And so our emotions right now for a lot of people are just the uncertainty of what's going to happen. So you take that with a teenager in their daily life and they kind of feel that way all the time. What's going to happen? How am I going to deal with this? What will people think? How will I overcome this? How long is this pain going to last? See, when you've gone through something like a flood or any other catastrophic event, the first thing you're asking is, when will I be back to normal? And for young people today that are in a catastrophic home, highly dysfunctional home, lots of chaos, drug use, alcohol use, law enforcement in the house all the time, they're asking the same things to themselves, but they have no one to get the answer from because the people that should be answering that for them are the ones causing the problems. And this is what makes teenagers today so easy to snap because they don't understand how to control their emotions. We have to teach emotional regulation and coping skills and emotional intelligence at a very early age. We cannot wait until someone's 13, 14, 15 years old. We have to teach it as they incrementally get older. So we teach that when they're 4, 5, 6, 7, age appropriately to do this. Very, very important. All right. And number 3, acknowledge their emotions. I just said that. Validate their feelings, even if you don't fully understand them. Teens need to feel heard and understood before they will open up. Man, I talk about this all the time in the book too. Years ago, I was a mediator here in Florida, and I worked in District 6, which is Pasco County, Tampa, St. Pete area. One of the things I learned in my training was that people want power, emotional power, not just physical power, but a sense of autonomy over themselves to make decisions, to have choices. And young people today that are in highly dysfunctional homes, they don't have that choice. So the only way they can get it, typically, and I've said this 1,000 times, is by doing something negative, whether it's hurting themselves, hurting someone else, stealing, not going to school, making a choice for themselves, even if it's not a good choice. It's a power play, it's a personal power play, and they have to do it. We all do it. We all have autonomy. We all want a sense of purpose for who we are, what we're going to do. If you're constantly being told that you're not good enough, you can't do something, you're going to find a way to have some power in your life. And just like it says here, acknowledge their emotions. We just talked about that. Teens need to feel heard and understood before they will open up. You and I are the same way. If you have a boss at work and he or she does not listen to you and they don't care about what you're doing, what's your performance going to be like? What's your willingness to go to work every day and speak to them, knowing that, well, what's the point? They're not going to listen to me. What's the point? They're not going to care. A young person who's 14, 15 years old, who has been in a highly dysfunctional, crazy environment for their whole life, already has the belief system that no one's going to care. And they need this power. They need something to be heard. It's very important. Number 2, monitor behavior closely. Monitor behavior closely. God, I can't speak right now. Understanding people's behavior, that's where the emotional intelligence comes in. You're actually seeing what's happening with them and kind of circumventing any problems because you can say, okay, this is what's going on. I need to look out for this. I need to watch this. With school shooters, and I've studied many of them, they don't have that. No one was watching. Well, let me take that back. The system was watching, law enforcement was watching, but there was no real outcome. There was no real follow through. And I don't want to list any of the school shooters in the last 10, 15 years on this series because I don't want to give them that acknowledgement. But I'll tell you that of the ones that I studied for my book, because I did do a whole thing on the school shooters, there were certain patterns that they all had and certain things that happened leading up to that infamous day. And one of those things was people knew something was happening, but they didn't follow through. They didn't listen to what was happening, and they thought, "Oh well, this is no big deal. This kid's fine. Situation's fine. We'll let the law enforcement handle it. We'll let the legal system handle it. We'll let CPS handle it. We'll let the foster care system handle it. We'll let the grandparents handle it. So we'll let the judge handle it." Somebody was passing the buck the whole way and passing these kids through, and it happens a lot. It happens a lot. So observe changes in routine. Pay attention to any significant shifts in behavior, withdrawal from friends, declining grades, sudden outbursts, or fascination with violence. This is In today's world with video games, young people today, and I'm sure Liam's going to hate hearing this, but young people today hate when I say this, but you are being conditioned to desensitize your brain to the outcomes of these violent behaviors. It's basic conditioning. The more you see something, the more you go, okay, it's all right. It's no big deal. It's kind of like eating a food you didn't like once. The first time you ate it, didn't like it. Second time you ate it, okay, it's not bad. You get a little bit older, your palate changes. Like, okay, I like rice now, or I like this now, or I like fish now. Where when you were younger, you didn't like it. We condition ourselves through exposure. Okay, exposure therapy is actually one way that the therapists help people get over the fear of heights, snakes, spiders, whatever it might be. So if you're exposed every day to these very realistic video games and getting away with this violence, and you already have the tendencies for violence, or you're expressing that tendency for violence, that's a horrible combination. Horrible, horrible combination. Um, let's see. Here we go. Check online activity. That's what I was talking about. Monitor online behavior, including social media and any platforms where they may be engaging in harmful content. Look out for expressions of anger, threats, or violent imagery. This is what happened in Georgia. They got the call that on Discord this kid posted a message, you wanted to shoot up a school. See, this is where I was saying earlier, if this had been my kid, I would have been on them. Now, I know for a fact that kids can hide apps. They can use different apps to hide apps. They can hide their history. So if you're not a tech savvy parent, then typically um, you're going to miss this stuff. That's why understanding how these things work and making it adamant from day one when they get that first phone or that first tablet that I'm checking all your history. I'm checking if you erased anything. I'm looking to see. I knew you were on the other night. Where's that date? How come there's nothing in here? What did you erase? You have to stay on them all the time when it comes to their online behavior. All right. Number 3, seeking professional help. Get a mental health evaluation. This is something too that parents that are having issues and problems with their kids, they expect the schools to do it, and the schools are overwhelmed. I can tell you right now. And I've got a story here from the Michigan shooting. Pull up my tablet. There were signs that were missed. I got it right here. I can tap into here. It says prosecutors detail warning signals missed by parents of Michigan school shooter suspect, and that's the name of the article. It's on from NPR, and it shows the mother and father both in jail with their lawyers. Um, it's just amazing to me that this stuff is all out here, and yet we still don't look at it as a society. We don't pay attention to it. We don't think it's going to ever happen to us. I've been speaking to people for the last 24, about 48 hours now that got flooded down here, and or their parents got flooded or their friends got flooded. And the first thing was, I didn't think it would happen. I didn't think this was supposed to be a big storm. It's always when we don't think it's something that's going to happen is when it happens. That's when we are caught off guard. That's when we want to think, well, that's somebody else, or this storm's a category 3, not a category 5, or it's 100 miles offshore. What could it possibly do to the tidal surge? Anything can happen. My kid's having a bad day. My kid's having a bad time at school. What's the big deal? He's a teenager. What could possibly go wrong? That type of thinking leads to something going wrong. So when it comes to understanding the psychology of a school shooter, we have to get help from other people. If that means going to a therapist, I know a lot of parents think that going to a therapist is, there's a stigma to that. And that's something that needs to change because since about 2010, with the advent, I've said it 1,000 times, with these phones and tablets and everything that I'm sitting here on. I got two laptops and a tablet and a phone sitting here to put this on right now, which is great because they're great tools in that sense. But like every tool, it can be used for something, dangerous or harmful. Since about 2010, when the selfies really became big and all the apps really took off, kids from that time period, I'll even go back and say as far as maybe 2005 or 6. Kids that were younger at that time, they're now in their early 20s, mid 20s, and all the kids behind them grew up with all of this stuff. And now you see parents giving kids phones and tablets at 3, 4, 5, 6 years old. And studies are coming out now that these tablets, these phones are rewiring the cognitive development of the brain. Think about that. These devices are doing so much damage to the normal cognitive development, social development, mental health development, just everything to our children. But yet we give it to them all the time because it makes our life easier. It makes it easier for us to put them in front of the phone or cave to what they want because they're not crying, they're not whining. But what you're doing is you're opening yourself and your children up to a world, literally a world of bad stuff. Bad stuff. So think about that when it comes to the social media. I understand kids want to talk to their friends, different things, but these devices are horrible. What happened to the kid in Georgia? He was on Discord. I've never checked that app out. I guess I will just for the sake of research. But that was the site that he was on, where he posted this message: "You want to shoot up a school." There's other apps that are. I list a bunch of them in my book. They're almost, gosh, it's been about a year and a half, 2 years since I actually wrote that section. So I should probably go in and fix it, add more. All these new apps that these kids are on, there's ways for them to hide them, to post things. But like with the kid in Georgia, he said, "Oh, I didn't do that. My account was hacked," and they believed him. Okay, so I don't go for that at all. Number three, also professional help is consider family therapy. Now, next week we have Nora Giddens will be on with us, and she's from Atlanta. Wonderful lady. Met her last week up in Atlanta at the Empower Success Fest. She was one of the audience members. We got to talking, and we had an amazing phone call the other day about all of this. So she's going to be here next week as a guest. If you have any questions, if you have any comments or concerns, that'll be the time to ask her. No, you're not being charged, but you can ask an actual family and teen therapist, what are some things I should look for? Or here's some situations that I'm having happen right now. What should I do? Um, Next week after that, we have Annie Alvarez, who is a wonderful podcaster. She is a counselor in Canada. She has a parenting podcast I've done a couple times. We're going to talk to her about what's going on in schools today. And between those two ladies, we're going to get some great information. I'm also talking with a psychologist. I'm trying to get his schedule worked out and some other folks so that we can get perspectives of folks that are in the business of kids right now, whether it's school teachers, counselors, therapists. Um, I am trying to also find where some of these shooters are housed in prison. To I want to get one of them. I don't know which one yet. My goal is to get an actual shooter on this series so that we can ask him, what were you thinking? What was going on with you? What was missed? And I know some people are saying that's a horrible thing to do. How can you do that? Well, again, if we don't talk to people, how are we going to understand? How are we going to know what they're going through? How are we going to know uh, how we can prevent if we don't talk to someone who actually did it? And I know it's kind of a stretch, but that's what I'm working on. All right. So, number four, work with school and community resources. This one, I believe this. Yes, we have to do that. But I also know that a lot of schools are so stretched, so thin, And this will be a good question in a couple weeks for Annie because the counselor in her will come out because that's what she does. Depending on the school, if it's a private school, if it's a public school, how big is that school? What's the ratio from student to counselor? There's a lot of things that factor into how much attention a one person or two people can give 5 or 600 students. It's really, really difficult. And it does take a team. It takes a lot of people to assess and observe and to watch what's going on and to listen. But ultimately, as a parent, it starts and ends with you. Yes, I'm gonna take a drink. So my throat's getting dry. Apologize. And yes, this is a Michigan State Cup. And yes, they got killed last night by Ohio State. But I'm a diehard fan, so there it is. Working with your school, working with your local resources is so important. Down here we have a great group called ASAP. We have Baycare, mental health. We have all kinds of facilities here in this area. We also have what's called the Baker Act. I don't know in your state or your area, but here in Florida, we have what's called the Baker Act. That's a 72-hour hold in the hospital. So what happens is this: if you believe that your son or daughter is a threat to himself or herself or to other people, and there's reasonable cause, the student, the child, teen, will be placed in a 72-hour hold and observed and hopefully get the help that he or she needs. And I've actually Baker corrected people. So here's what the process is. If you think that someone is hurting themselves or they're doing drugs or they're saying things that aren't very uh, friendly, they're harmful, you can call the sheriff's office here in Florida. Say, I need to put a Baker Act. I need someone to come out and assess. So you yourself will not actually do the Baker Act. The sheriff will come out, the deputy will come out, usually two. And if there's a female involved, there'll be a female officer come out as well. And sometimes, if you think that that child is on drugs or something, they will bring out a paramedic. So they'll come out and do what they got to do. And then um, the deputies will assess based on some questions and different things. The paramedics will look at them, look at if they're on drugs or whatnot, and they will take them off. They're not arrested. It is just a 72-hour psychiatric hold. And this gives you as a parent time to kind of regroup what you need to do. It gets the help to your son or daughter the way that it should be. They can talk to doctors, they can get help they need to get. And it allows also some documentation that there's some things going on. Okay. I don't know. There might be something to other states, but here in Florida, we have the Baker Act. Um, engage with peer support. Sometimes teens need benefit from peer programs or youth groups that focus on emotional health and conflict resolution and social skills. That is an amazing thing. And I tried to do that back in 2013 here in Pasco County. I started a group for teens in an organization called Crazy at Freedom. I've talked about this many times. And I tried to get that into the schools back then because kids were dropping off like one or two a month here in suicide. It was horrible. That's why I started the organization. And for whatever reason, it didn't get into the schools. I don't want to speculate now. It's been a long time, but I've known for a very long time that peer support, honest to goodness peer support, not now, let me rephrase this. When people think peer support, they think you're just a bunch of people talking in the bubble. Okay. You're talking your own little bubble. Peer support has to have a moderator. There has to be someone that can say, okay, I hear you, but how about this? How about that? If it's just a bunch of teenagers all talking and going back and forth, it becomes basically a gripe fest and nothing really gets done. So there has to be someone there that can kind of, guide the thoughts, guide the emotions, and keep them on task, if you will. It's really important to have that though. So once they can kind of, you can actually have a teen moderator as long as that teen is old enough to mature enough to understand what their role is. But it's also good to have an adult there that can assess, okay, there's maybe some things that need to be looked at a little bit deeper. But peer support is incredibly important for young people. Now, when it comes to someone of a school shooter mentality, these kids are typically, and this is based on my research, they're loners. They're isolated. They're what we would call the weird kid, the shy kid. They're standoffish. They're out. They're not really in the main mix. So these kids probably wouldn't do a lot of peer to peer support. They probably don't want it unless they find a couple of kids with their own type of thinking that violence and all these things are cool. But again, it's be very very small. That's a very very small group, and that's not the kind of peer support that we're talking about here. All right. Establish a safe environment. I'm not a big fan of the safe space mentality that we saw break out in 2016, but I do understand that young people have to have somewhere they can go, especially kids that are in a very dysfunctional home. Kids that are in a home that's violent and volatile and stressful. They do need a place where they can calm down and re-regulate themselves and have that sense of you know because when you're in that fight or flight all the time and you've got high emotion and high cortisol levels and high stress levels and high adrenaline levels, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're not thinking. And what we talked about 2 weeks ago was the lack of sleep. If you're not getting enough sleep, you're not functioning properly. You can't think properly. And if you're not functioning properly in school, that means your grades are probably off. If your grades are off, then you've got something going on there with or you're gonna be dropped, or you're gonna fail. So it's a downward spiral for these kids. So it's very, very important they do have a place where they can re-regulate their emotions, where they can feel supported, where they can feel heard, where they can feel like, okay, I'm not going to be judged if I tell somebody that I think this or felt that or wondered about such and such. Very, very important that they have a place to go and feel confident that when they tell someone something in confidence, unless it's going to be something that's hurting themselves or someone else, like with the Baker Act situation. But if it's not to that level, that they feel like they can talk to you and listen and be heard and not judged. Incredibly important. Very, very important. All right, where we at here? Um, Secure any weapons of danger. Okay, this is part of the establish a safe environment. Secure any weapons or dangerous items. If there are firearms or weapons in the home, lock them up, remove them entirely. Access to weapons is a terrible in a troubled home environment increases the risk of violence. What just happened in Georgia? I just said it. Everyone came to his home. The dad said he has guns here, but he doesn't have access to them. So what does the dad do? He goes out and buys him a weapon. What happened in Michigan? They went out and bought him a weapon. Why? This makes no sense. So again, if you have a teenager that is already in a dysfunctional environment, already showing signs of distress, already showing signs of abnormal behavior, already showing signs of isolationism, already showing signs of criminal activity, whatever it may be. Why in the world would you go out and buy them a gun? What is the purpose of that? What is the sense of that? There isn't any. There's no excuse. And that's why both fathers, and looks like perhaps the mom in Georgia, she might get away with it. But the mom in Michigan is sitting in jail. The dad in Michigan is sitting in jail. And the dad in Georgia is sitting in jail because they all knew they met all these criteria that I'm looking at right here. They met all these criteria on this screen right here. And yet we wonder why, like, what the heck? How could this be? Uh, it baffles my mind that adults can be so lax in their thinking when it comes to something in today's world, when it comes to school shooters. It's just nuts. Um, Create boundaries around media consumption. Limit your teens' exposure to violent video games. I just said that a few minutes ago. Movies or content that glorifies violence. Instead, encourage media that promotes healthy emotional expression and problem solving. Okay, that sounds great in theory. But when every game that comes out the kids want is violent or sexual in nature or something of that along that line, you're not going to keep them off of that. If you're in a home with a lot of dysfunction and just craziness, those parents probably aren't going to say, "Let's go talk about our feelings, Johnny. Let's go talk about what's happening." No, it's not going to happen. This is why, for us as outside parents, school teachers, community leaders, my question is, what can we do? Because we know these parents are not going to step up. We already know it. Because if they were, they would have already, and they're not. So my question for this whole next 6 weeks after today is, what can we do as a society? What can we do to intercede? And I know, again, that sounds so like power hungry and big brother and all that kind of stuff, but it only takes one kid to kill multiple people that it could have been prevented. I want to say that all school shootings can be prevented. Probably not all of them, because some kids can do what they want to do, and they are of like, for instance, Elliot Rogers in California was 22. He was in college, living on his own, so his parents didn't really know what was going on in his apartment until they saw his videos on YouTube, which are now pulled down, and his written 100 plus page manifesto about what he wanted to do has been documented. It's out there. It's pretty gruesome. So for those parents leading up to that, though, there were signs. There were definite signs. And other school shooters, uh, they just were angry, angry, angry people, or they were mentally disturbed. I really feel like, unless they had him drugged up, but the kid in South Florida a couple of years ago, he just looked incredibly mentally disturbed to me. Now, maybe they had him drugged up for court, because I've never seen him outside of that setting on TV and court and whatnot. So I don't know what he was going to look like with, normal everyday uh, look. He could have been perfectly normal looking, but the stuff I saw him, he looked very drugged up and, droopy eyed, and just like he was just kind of sitting there. Uh, Maybe that is him. I don't know, but understanding, these things with these kids, you're not going to get these kids off of violent video games. And you're not going to have parents in those homes saying, let's go talk about problem solving. Because even if those parents were to go to a school meeting like they did in Michigan, the parents don't know how to problem solve. That's why they're in such chaos as it is as parents and adults. So maybe putting parents in jail is a first step. But maybe we say, okay, little Susie and little Johnny are having these problems in third grade, fourth grade, fifth grade. We need to start putting the parents in parenting classes. We need to start mandating parenting leadership classes and say, listen, if you don't do this and something happens and it's all documented, you're going to prison. Maybe that is what we need to do. I don't know. I want to know what's happening with everybody. All right. Let's see. Address bullying or peer issues. That's been going on for many, many years. I mean, anybody been bullied before in school? We've been bullied for decades. It is bad today, absolutely. And I think the bullying issue is one that hit a hot point probably, I want to say 10 years ago. It really became a thing. And now it's still involved. I just read an article today where a 14-year-old girl, I believe in England, killed herself the other night. She was bullied relentlessly, and her mother was having brain surgery or brain cancer one, and she was being teased about that. I don't know why kids at 14 would do that to a girl's mother's sick, but she killed herself at 14. Teen suicide is something else we can look at down the road aside from school shooters. This is dysfunction within our kids, our young people across the board. Uh, it's a horrible thing that's happening, and I just want your input to figure out how to fix it, what we can do. Empower them with coping strategies. Okay, so you want to empower your kid with coping strategies. Again, if a child's in a negative home, who's there to help them with coping strategies? Because in most of these homes, coping strategies are alcohol, drugs, violence, um, criminal activity. I mean, there's just all kinds of absenteeism. When I say absenteeism, I mean the parents can be in the home physically, but emotionally they're not there. They're not even around. So for these kids, that's not really even an option. I mean, it's a strategy, but it's not even an option. Then it says, stay calm and don't panic. Avoid overreacting. While it's important to take warning signs seriously, try not to overreact and make your teen feel like they're being labeled as a bad kid, which I agree with that. Overreacting can lead to your teen shutting down and refusing to engage. Okay, labeling is a horrible thing. I've talked about before. So if your kid is a bad kid, how do you let them know they're being a bad kid without saying you're a bad kid? Hmm, that's not easy. The schools label kids. Law enforcement labels kids. Kids are labeled whether the good kid, the bad kid, the smart kid, the dumb kid, the lazy kid, uh, they're all categorized. So, how do we avoid that? That's a big question that I would love your input on. How do we avoid letting a kid who's not being a great kid not call them a bad kid? I mean, that's a hard thing to do. So, what kind of dialogue do we use? Do we say, "Hey, Johnny, I realize you're having a bad day, but let's look at what you're doing here. Does this really seem logical to you? Does it seem okay to you?" Typically, that kid's not going to be engaged. We have to change our dialogue for them to understand how to change theirs. So I think a big portion of this understanding of a school shooter, the psychology of a school shooter, is understanding how we as adults change our own behaviors. We change our own thinking. We change our own belief systems. Because if we're coming at it like, I'm the adult, I'm perfect, I know everything, and you're the kid, and you just gotta do what I say, it's not gonna work. That kid is not gonna be engaged. That kid is not, it's gonna shut down. That's just not gonna happen. So again, my question for all this is, what do we do as a society? What do we do as parents to change our behavior, to change the societal norm, and to rid the stigma of getting help and talking and opening up to these parents that themselves have issues? I was just talking to a young lady the other day that she said that her uncle was, oh gosh, was it Hank Earl Carr? I think is the guy's name. Hank Earl Carr. We were talking about this, and she said, my uncle, she said, because I said, what do we do? And she said, well, why don't we do an assessment on the family? So, Dana, if you see this, thank you. She said, I grew up in a family of total dysfunction. The girl's 26 now. At 17, her father kicked her out of the house, um, beat her up. Her mom was high on meth or crack or one, and they put this young girl in a halfway house because that she attacked them when it was the other way around. And her uncle is a guy that I believe it was uh, Hank Earl Carr. I know something like that, but he killed three police officers back in 1990. I want to say 98 here in Florida. That was her uncle. So the stuff that she grew up in was just horrible. She and her sister both. I've talked to both of them. And i- trying to understand what they went through, these two girls. Parents are on drugs, unemployed, violence, family violence, not just mom and dad, but like family violence. Those types of parents, those aunts and uncles, they're not going to listen to anything that I'm talking about right now. Nothing. So where does that leave the kid? When the kid then turns around and does something and hurts people, first thing we do up until recently, we look at the kid. Why? So her suggestion was we need to do an assessment before a family can have a weapon, not just a background check, but a family history check. I thought this was a great idea. Family history check. Who is involved in that family? What's the family culture like? If it's one person, it's one thing, but if it's aunts, uncles, moms, dads, all these things, the kid in Georgia, his mom has a rap sheet. I think the dad does. I'm not positive on that, but I know in Michigan, both of those parents were documented as having massive dysfunction, trouble with the law. And if we look at other school shooters, we could probably look at the same thing and say, okay, then why don't we look at the family history? Look at that dynamic. Is it something that's fallen apart? Is it something that's, should be looked at? And then maybe not give them a gun. Don't let them have any weapons in the house. That'll go against Second Amendment. People will get mad about that. But it's if you're a chronic DUI person, you had a bunch of DUIs, what happens? They take away your license. Now, driving is a privilege, not a right, where gun ownership is a constitutional right. I get that. But I'm also for provisions because of today's environment. I'm not saying you can't have a gun. I'm saying change your family history and change your legal issues. But there again, I know people that are felons that have guns, and uh, if someone wants a gun, they're going to get it. So that maybe that's not the issue. But I liked your idea of looking at the family history and making an assessment of who can have weapons based on the family history. And that's come from a girl that grew up living in it. So that was a great idea on her part. I just don't think it'd ever work because people go nuts with that too. All right. Now, this one says this is kind of interesting. Involve law enforcement as a last resort. Let's figure out why. If threats are imminent, act immediately. If you believe your team poses an immediate threat to themselves or others, contact law enforcement or take them to an emergency room, mental health facility. Safety should always be the first priority. Okay. That goes back to my Baker Act, which I was talking about a few minutes ago. That's what I was talking about. If you think that they're going to hurt themselves or someone else, like let's say you see your kid is 14, 15 years old, behavior's changing, they're drawing crazy stuff, they're saying different things, or they're withdrawing. At that point, I would call the sheriff's office and say, I think my son is going through something and his behavior is changing. I would like to have him assessed. And I know that he won't go on with me because he's 6'2", he weighs 190 pounds, he's 15 years old, and he's angry, he's violent. That's when you'd want the police to come in and have that done. I've talked about this in the past. Years ago at my job, I had a dad come to me and say, I want to charge my son with attempted murder. And his son, I've been working with his son. His son was not cognitively 100%. I don't know his exact diagnosis. I'm not going to sit here and speculate on what it was, but I know that he was off. Okay. He was very off. And this guy was 19 years old, this son, 6'2", 240, 250, very large, and angry. Now, I got along with him well, and my coworker got along with him well in our program, but I knew that the parents were having issues. They were older. They adopted him when they were older because he was a family member's child. The biological father was a drug addict and in prison. And I think the mother was also a drug addict. So this boy was born with some issues. When he became 19, 18, 19, he was a full-blown, huge adult guy with the mind of about a 10-year-old. And I say 10-year-old because when I was working with him, he would tell me, I feel like I'm like 10 years old. He just didn't understand certain concepts. Things didn't work because his brain just wasn't progressing developmentally and processing was off. And very nice kid when you talk to him, but if you made him mad, he was off like a, you know, half-inch fuse. It was just crazy. So one day, uh, the parents come to our office and they can't find him, but they want to press charges. I'm not law enforcement, so I was like, "Why'd you come to me?" Like, 'cause they said, "Because he will talk to you and he'll come in here." So I called him. He came in. The parents were there. I sat with them and 4 sheriff's deputies for 4 hours. I had 2 women deputies because their mom was there, and I had 2 male deputies, and the 2 male deputies wanted to take him to jail. They just wanted to arrest him right there, listen to the father, and he's going for attempted murder at 19. The mom was freaking out, and as I'm listening to them and I'm talking to them about the reason he busted the door down in their bedrooms, they had locks on the bedroom doors. The reason he did that, once I figured out after talking to him, was because the dad took his paycheck. Now, this kid loved this game called Magic, and he would spend every penny of his paycheck, 300 or 400 bucks, where it was, on these Magic cards. I don't even know what that is. So the dad said, "Well, you're 19 now. You got to start paying some bills, helping with the water and things like that." Well, he didn't understand it because again, his mind was like a 10-year-old. His body was a grown man, but his mind was like a 10-year-old. So the father was seeing him as a grown up, not talking to him like a younger child because he didn't understand. He didn't want to. So this kid busted down the door, wanted his check, and he did happen to have a knife in his hand. And I asked him, I said, "What was the knife for?" He said, "I don't know. I just grabbed it." And see, that's what happens when kids are in a rage. They don't think because their emotions are not thinking clearly. They're just thinking of the here and now. So the dad got scared, wanted to press charges. So I sat there for the 4 hours and negotiated a deal for him to get Baker acted, not arrested, and to get the psychological evaluation that he needed at 19 because he down you're 18, so you're gonna go as an adult, right? So he's 19 years old now, so you're gonna take him as an adult. But I even told the officers, I said, "Look, yes, he's as big as a mountain, but he is not. This is not who this kid is. If you talk to him and listen to him, he's 10. So we have to treat him that way mentally and then figure out what the courts want to do and evaluations how they come out." So I saved him from getting arrested. We walked him out. They wanted to put cuffs on him. I said no. I looked at him. I said, "You going to be okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'll be fine." So he did not get violent. He did not do anything. But this is where understanding with the empathy and the compassion has to come in. These kids are broken. These kids are emotionally broken, and they've been in these horrible situations. So when they and I'm not justifying a school shooter, okay? Don't misconstrue what I'm saying here. But we have to understand that this happens. This created uh, monster, if you will, started at 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up through. Not when they actually pulled that trigger. This is something that happened years before. So going into, we've got 2 minutes left here. Going into this next week, if you got any questions, please reach out to me at leadyourteen@gmail.com. I'll get those questions to Nora, and we'll be able to address those questions throughout the next show. And hopefully we can get some things clarified. And I'd love to know everyone's thoughts. Again, my name is Chris Mahan. This has been another episode of Shadows on the Wall, Psychology of a School Shooter. Next week, 5 o'clock, we have special guest. Following week, another special guest. So stick with us. Give me your ideas. Email them to leadyourteen@gmail.com. You guys have a great week.